I wasn't looking for another woman. That's the first thing you should know. The very last thing I wanted was the complication of another heartbeat in my house, the scent of someone else's shampoo in my shower, the phantom weight of another body in my bed. I had moved to this aggressively beige suburban street for the express purpose of being alone. My house, a saltbox colonial with bland gray siding, was a fortress of solitude, its silence a balm over the fresh, ragged wounds left by Sarah. Each unpacked box was a brick in the wall I was building around myself, a promise of quiet, of peace, of a life blessedly free of the kind of emotional shrapnel that comes from loving women who don't know how to love you back. The air inside still smelled of paint and new carpet, a sterile scent I was trying to convince myself was cleansing. Outside, the October sky was a flat, unforgiving gray, mirroring the landscape of my own heart. I was standing in the living room, surrounded by towers of cardboard, holding a single chipped ceramic mug, wondering where the hell I'd pack the kettle, when a knock echoed through the empty space. It was a tentative sound, a soft rapping that was almost polite enough to ignore. I considered it. I had no neighbors, not really. Just houses, architectural placeholders for lives I had no interest in knowing. But the knock came again, a little more insistent this time. With a sigh that felt like it dredged up the dregs of my soul, I navigated the maze of my half-unpacked life and pulled open the front door. And there she was. My solitude, it turned out, lived next door. She was tall, with skin the color of rich, dark soil after a rain. Her hair was a magnificent cloud of tight coils, some of which had escaped the colorful scarf she'd wrapped around her head. She wore a paint-splattered gray sweatshirt, leggings, and a look of profound, weary frustration. In one hand, she held an empty plastic bucket. My eyes catalogued her, an old, unwelcome habit, the elegant line of her throat, the strength in her shoulders under the soft cotton, the full curve of her mouth, currently pressed into a thin line of distress. "Hi," she said, her voice a low, smooth alto that seemed to vibrate in the damp air between us. "I am so sorry to bother you. I'm Maya. I live next door." She gestured with the bucket toward the identical house to my left. This is a really weird thing to ask, and I totally understand if you say no, but my water just got cut off. Like, completely. Landlord says a pipe burst under the street, and it could be a while. She winced, as if the words themselves were painful. I was wondering if I could possibly fill this bucket up. I just need to be able to flush my toilet. My brain, the part of it that was still reeling from Sarah, screamed, "No, close the door, say you can't, your plumbing is new. You don't know how it works." Lie. But the other part of me, the part that recognized the deep, bone-weary, exhaustion in her eyes, couldn't do it. I saw a flicker of something there, a familiar desperation that I knew all too well. The universe had a sick sense of humor. I had come here to be an island, and it had sent a castaway to my shore on my third day. "Don't be ridiculous," I heard myself say, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "Don't fill a bucket. Come in and use the shower." The relief that washed over her face was so potent, it was almost a physical force. It softened the tense lines around her eyes, allowed her shoulders to drop an inch. "Are you serious?" she breathed. "Oh my God, you are a lifesaver. I was in the middle of dyeing fabric. I look like a mess and I smell like vinegar." I hadn't noticed the smell until she mentioned it, but now it was there, sharp and acidic, clinging to her clothes. It was a strangely domestic, oddly intimate detail. I stepped back, holding the door wider. "It's fine. I'm Alara. The bathroom's upstairs, first door on the right. Towels are in the linen closet next to it. They're probably clean. I think." She offered a small, grateful smile that transformed her entire face. It was like the sun breaking through that flat, gray sky. "Thank you. Seriously. Thank you." as she stepped over my threshold, bringing the scent of vinegar and something warm and earthy like potting soil and spice, into my sterile, paint-scented house. I felt a profound sense of dread. I was letting a woman into my bathroom. A beautiful woman. A beautiful woman who was about to be naked and wet just a few feet away from me. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door after I closed it, listening to her footsteps on the stairs. This was a mistake. I wasn't building a fortress. I was building a house of cards, and I had just invited the wind inside. I tried to busy myself with the boxes, to ignore the sudden, blatant presence of another person in my meticulously curated emptiness. But it was impossible. Her existence was an invasion of the senses. I could hear the creak of the floorboards above me as she moved around the bathroom. I heard the squeak of the faucet, a sound I was still getting used to, followed by the rush of the shower, the sound of water, my water, sluicing over her skin. My house suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. I found myself imagining the steam fogging the mirror, water tracing paths down the elegant column of her neck, disappearing beneath the curve of her collarbone. I squeezed my eyes shut, grabbing the edge of a cardboard box until my knuckles turned white. Get a grip, Alara. This was just a neighbor, a temporary inconvenience, a kindness you were extending because you weren't a complete monster. It meant nothing. It was absurd to overlay the ghosts of my past onto this stranger, to project my own complicated, messy desires onto her. She was just a woman who needed a shower, and I was just a woman who needed to find the damn kettle. The water shut off, upstairs. The silence that followed was somehow more charged than the noise had been. I held my breath, listening. A few minutes later, her footsteps descended the stairs. She appeared at the edge of the living room, wrapped in one of my oversized fluffy gray towels. Another, smaller towel was wrapped around her hair like a turban. Her skin glowed, damp and clean. The scent of vinegar was gone, replaced by the clean, gender-neutral fragrance of my own soap, sandalwood and black pepper. The smell of my soap on her skin was a violation of some treaty I hadn't even known I'd signed with myself. "That was amazing," she said, her voice soft. "You have no idea." "It's just water," I mumbled, focusing intently on the packing tape of a box labeled kitchen. "Free or agile." "It's everything when you don't have it," she replied. She lingered for a moment, and I could feel her eyes on me. I refused to look up. "Well, I should let you get back to all this." She gestured to the chaotic landscape of my life. "Thanks again. You really saved me." "It's no problem," I said, my voice tight. I walked her to the door, maintaining a careful distance. She paused on the porch, turning back to me. "I'm Maya," she said again, as if reintroducing herself now that she wasn't in a state of crisis. "Ilara," I repeated. "Right, Ilara." She tested the name on her tongue, and a strange warmth bloomed in my chest. "I hope this whole water thing is a one-day issue, but if it's not, would it be okay if I—" "Yeah," I said, cutting her off before she had to finish the humbling question. "Of course, just knock." She gave me another one of those devastatingly warm smiles, and then she was gone, jogging lightly across the damp lawn that separated our two identical houses. I closed the door and leaned against it. The scent of my own soap, now tangled up with the essence of her, lingering in the hallway. The silence of the house rushed back in, but it was different now. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was empty. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that she would be back tomorrow. The next morning, the knock came at 7 a.m., just as I was contemplating the existential dread of my first cup of coffee. This time, Maya was dressed for work in a stylish, wide-legged jumpsuit and carried a small bag. Her smile was a little sheepish. "Heard from the landlord," she said without preamble. It's not the street. It's a pipe leading into my unit. It's a whole thing. They have to dig. It could be 3 or 4 days. She looked down at her shoes, a clear vulnerability in the gesture. I hate to ask. My heart did a complicated, annoying little flutter. I already said it was fine, I said, trying to sound casual, like it was no big deal to have this impossibly attractive woman disrupting my carefully constructed monastic life. Come on in. And so the rhythm began. Every morning she would arrive, a quiet shadow in the early light, and I would let her in. I would make coffee while she showered, the sound becoming a strange new part of my morning routine. I'd pour her a cup, and we would sit in a mostly silent truce at my still bare dining table, sipping from mismatched mugs. Then she would leave for work, and I would be left in a house that felt twice as empty, the air thick with the ghost of her presence. In the evenings, she would return to use the kitchen, bringing her own groceries and insisting on cooking enough for both of us as repayment. I resisted at first. You don't have to do that, I'd insisted the first night, watching as she expertly chopped an onion, her movements fluid and sure. I want to, she'd said, not looking up from her task. You're saving my life. The least I can do is save you from eating cereal for dinner. I couldn't argue with that, so I let her. I sat on a stool at the kitchen island, nursing a glass of wine, and I watched her. I watched the way she moved in my kitchen, a space that was still foreign to me, with an ease I couldn't yet muster. She seemed to know where things were before I did. I watched the muscles in her back shift under her shirt as she reached for a pan. I watched the concentration on her face as she tasted a sauce. Her full bottom lip caught for a second between her teeth. I learned things about her in these small, quiet moments. I learned she was a textile artist working for a small, independent design studio downtown. The paint on her sweatshirt that first day was from her own personal projects. I learned she hummed when she was focused, a low, tuneless sound that was surprisingly comforting. I learned she had 2 younger brothers and a mother in Florida, who she called every Sunday. I learned she had moved here 6 months ago for the job, and she found the suburbs just as soulless as I did. It's like living in a witness protection program, she'd said one night, a dry wit lacing her tone as she slid a plate of perfectly seared salmon and asparagus in front of me. Everything is just so beige. I chose it for the beige, I admitted, and the corner of her mouth quirked up. Running from something? She asked lightly, but her eyes were perceptive, holding mine. My defenses snapped back into place. Just tired of noise, I said, a half-truth that felt like a lie. I immediately changed the subject, asking about the type of dye she used in her work, and she let me. She never pushed. That was the most dangerous thing about her. Her patience. Her quiet, observant presence created a space that felt unnervingly safe, and safety was a luxury I couldn't afford. Every interaction was a tightrope walk over a chasm of my own making. I was so intensely aware of her. It was a physical ache. When she brushed past me in the narrow hallway, the heat from her body seemed to scorch my skin through my clothes. I knew the exact scent of her shampoo, something with coconut and hibiscus, and how it mingled with the sandalwood of my soap. I knew that she had a tiny star-shaped scar just above her right eyebrow, visible only when the light hit it a certain way. My internal monologue was a war zone. One part of me, the lonely, wounded part, craved this effortless connection, this warmth that was slowly seeping into the cracks of my frozen heart. But the other part, the part that remembered Sarah's casual cruelty, the sting of her final words, "You're just too much, Ilara, too intense, it's suffocating," was screaming at me to retreat, to put the walls back up, to end this strange domestic charade before it became something I couldn't control. My pride was also a factor. I had been so determined to be self-sufficient, to need no one. And here I was, looking forward to the sound of her key. I'd given her a spare on day 3, a practical decision that felt like a staggering intimacy, in my lock each evening. I was becoming dependent on her presence to make the silence bearable. One evening, about a week into the ordeal, a storm rolled in. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind threw handfuls of rain against the windows. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the house into a sudden, profound darkness. I yelped, a pathetic, startled sound, a beat of silence, and then Maya's voice came from the living room, calm and steady. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, my voice shaky. "Just not a fan of sudden blackouts." I could hear her moving, the soft shuffle of her feet on the hardwood floors. A moment later, the beam of her phone's flashlight cut through the gloom, finding my face. "Me neither," she said. Her face was illuminated from below, creating soft shadows that made her cheekbones look even sharper. "I think I saw some candles in that drawer in the kitchen, the one that sticks." Together, we navigated to the kitchen, our shoulders occasionally brushing in the dark. The small, accidental touches sent jolts through my system. We found the candles and a lighter. Soon, the kitchen was filled with the soft, dancing light of 3 vanilla-scented tea lights I'd bought on a whim and never used. The flickering glow made the space feel smaller, more intimate. The storm raged outside, but in our little bubble of light it was quiet. "I guess dinner's going to be a cold one," she said, leaning against the counter. The candlelight caught the silver hoops in her ears, making them gleam. "I have peanut butter and a loaf of bread," I offered, "and a bottle of red wine that doesn't need a corkscrew." She laughed, a real throaty sound that echoed in the quiet room. "A feast for queens." We sat on the floor in the living room, leaning against the sofa, eating peanut butter sandwiches on paper towels and drinking wine straight from the bottle, passing it back and forth. The storm provided a soundtrack of roaring wind and drumming rain. The formal boundaries of our neighborly arrangement seemed to dissolve in the darkness. "So," she said, after a long, comfortable silence, "you never told me what kind of noise you were tired of." The question was gentle, an invitation, not a demand. The wine, or the darkness, or the disarming sincerity in her voice made me answer. "A person," I said, the word tasting like ash. The noise was a person. Maya didn't say anything. She just took the wine bottle from my hand, took a slow sip, and passed it back, her fingers brushing mine. The touch was light, but it lingered, a spark of warmth in the cool air. "I get that," she said softly. "The loudest noises are the ones that live in your house with you." I looked at her, really looked at her, in the flickering candlelight. I saw not just a beautiful neighbor, but a woman who understood silence, a woman who knew about the different kinds of noise. In that moment, the carefully constructed walls around my heart didn't just crack. A whole section of the damn thing crumbled into dust. And I was terrified, because I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I wanted to let her in. The days that followed the storm were different. A subtle shift had occurred in the atmosphere of the house. The tension was still there, but it was no longer a taut wire of anxiety. It was the thrumming, resonant hum of a cello string. We talked more. The conversations drifted from the practical, updates on the plumbing disaster, which was now entering its second week with no end in sight, to the personal. She told me about growing up in Florida, about the suffocating humidity, and the fierce love of her mother. She described the joy she found in her art, the magic of transforming plain white silk into a riot of color and pattern. "It feels like alchemy," she explained one evening, her eyes bright with passion as she sketched in a notebook at the kitchen island, taking something simple and making it beautiful, just by adding the right elements and a little bit of heat. I found myself watching her hands as she spoke. They were strong, capable hands, with long, elegant fingers. There were faint, colorful stains on her cuticles, a permanent reminder of her craft. I imagined those hands on me, and the thought was so vivid, so overwhelming, that I had to look away, my cheeks flushing with heat. In return, I offered up pieces of myself, small, carefully chosen fragments of my story. I told her I was a freelance copy editor, that I worked from home, which was why I could live in a beige purgatory in the middle of nowhere. I told her about growing up in the city, about my older sister Jessica, who was a lawyer and a perpetual worrier. I even, one night, told her about Sarah. We were cleaning up after dinner, a comfortable domesticity settling over us. I was washing, she was drying. The space between us at the sink was small, and I was acutely aware of the warmth of her arm next to mine. She was an architect, I said, my voice quiet, directed at the soapy water. She built beautiful things for other people, but she was a wrecking ball in her own life, in our life. Maya stopped drying the plate in her hand. She turned her head, and I could feel her gaze on the side of my face. I'm sorry, Alara. It's fine, I said automatically, the lie tasting stale. It was a while ago. It doesn't sound fine, she said gently. It sounds like it's the reason you're hiding out here. I stopped scrubbing, my hands still in the water. I turned to face her. She was so close. The air was thick with the scent of lemon dish soap in her, that earthy, spicy smell that was uniquely Maya. Her expression was full of a soft, patient understanding that made my throat tighten. This was the danger of her, this compassion. It was a key, and it was turning the lock on a door I had bolted shut for my own protection. I started, then stopped. My voice was thick with unshed tears. I don't want to be someone's project or their collateral damage. She placed the plate and the dish towel on the counter. Then, very slowly, as if giving me time to pull away, she reached out and placed her hand on my arm. Her touch was electric. It wasn't a fleeting brush of fingers. It was a firm, grounding pressure. Her thumb stroked my skin, a small, soothing gesture that sent a tremor through me. Some people are builders, not wrecking balls, she said, her voice a low murmur. Her eyes, dark and deep in the warm kitchen light, held mine. You just have to let them in so they can show you. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it, the turn. The moment where the subtext that had been humming between us for days suddenly broke the surface, gasping for air. It was a confession and a question all at once. The air crackled. I could feel the pull, the magnetic force that had been growing stronger with every shared meal, every quiet conversation, every accidental touch. All I had to do was lean in. Just a few inches. That's all it would take to close the distance between our mouths. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. I wanted to taste her, to feel the softness of her lips against mine, to lose myself in the safety I saw in her eyes. But Sarah's voice was a venomous whisper in my ear. Too much, too intense, suffocating. Fear, cold and sharp, sliced through the warm intimacy of the moment. I pulled my arm back, breaking the contact. The loss of her touch was a physical ache. I should, finish these dishes, I stammered, turning back to the sink, my hands trembling. Maya didn't say anything for a long moment. I could feel her stillness behind me. I expected her to leave, to retreat to the guest room I'd set her up in, wounded by my rejection. But she didn't. She just picked up the dish towel again. Okay, she said softly, her voice devoid of any judgment. I'll dry. And in that moment, her quiet acceptance was more intimate than any kiss could have been. She had seen my fear, my hesitation, and she hadn't run. She had stayed. She stayed. And she dried the dishes, and the space between us was filled with a new kind of tension, Not the question of if, but the agonizing, electrifying question of when. The days following what I mentally dubbed the kitchen incident were a masterclass in exquisite torture. The unspoken thing between us was now a living entity in the house. It sat with us at the breakfast table. It curled up on the sofa between us when we watched movies. It lingered in the steam-filled air of the hallway after she showered. Every single interaction was charged with a heavy, languid electricity. We became experts in the art of the almost moment. Her hand would hover over mine when she passed me the salt. My fingers would brush against the small of her back as I squeezed past her in the hallway. We'd catch each other's eye from across the room, and a whole conversation would pass between us in a single, sustained look. The longing was so palpable. I felt like I could taste it on the back of my tongue, metallic and sweet. My internal monologue, once a fortress, was now a city under siege. My thoughts were consumed by her. I'd be trying to edit a manuscript about tax law, and my mind would drift to the sound of her laugh. I'd be making a grocery list and would find myself adding the brand of tea she liked. I was losing the battle with myself, and a terrifying part of me didn't even want to fight anymore. I was tired of being a fortress. I wanted to be a harbor. I wanted to let her ship come into dock. The plumbing situation had become a dark joke between us. The landlord was a phantom, full of excuses and delays. The front yard was now home to a muddy trench and a pile of dirt, a physical manifestation of the disruption Maya had brought into my life. She'd started paying me for utilities, a formal transaction that felt absurd given the intimacy we were sharing. "This is ridiculous," she said one afternoon, staring out the window at the muddy pit. "I should just find a new apartment." Panic, cold and immediate, seized me. The thought of her leaving, of the house returning to its sterile silence, was unbearable. "No," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. I softened my voice. "Don't do that. It's not a problem, you being here." She turned from the window to look at me, a knowing, gentle expression on her face. "Isn't it?" My phone buzzed on the counter before I could answer, shattering the moment. The screen lit up with a picture of my sister, Jessica, her smile wide and perfect. I ignored it. "Alara," Maya said, her voice soft. "It's a problem for you. You're trying so hard to keep me at arm's length, and we're living in each other's pockets. It's not fair to you." "You don't know what's fair to me," I retorted, the words defensive. "I know you flinch every time I get too close," she said simply, and the truth of it silenced me. My phone buzzed again, insistent. With a sigh of frustration, I snatched it off the counter and answered, turning my back to Maya as if to shield myself. "What, Jess?" I snapped. "Well, hello to you too, sunshine," my sister's voice chirped, relentlessly cheerful. "Just calling to check in. You haven't answered my last 3 texts. Everything okay in your hermitage?" "Everything's fine. I'm busy." "Busy with what? Alphabetizing your canned goods? Come on, Alara, talk to me. Are you okay? You sound different. You're not just hiding away again, are you? After what happened with Sarah?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Hearing it out loud, in this house, with Maya standing just a few feet behind me, felt like a desecration. All the old pain, the shame, the feeling of being too much came rushing back. My carefully constructed composure crumbled. "I have to go," I said, my voice thick. I hung up before she could reply, tossing the phone onto the counter with a clatter. I stood there, my back still to Maya, my hands braced on the edge of the sink, breathing hard. I felt exposed, all my raw, damaged parts laid bare by that one casual, well-intentioned phone call. I heard her take a step closer. I braced myself for a platitude, an awkward pat on the back. Instead, she just said my name. "Alara." It was the way she said it, not with pity, but with a deep, resonant empathy that cracked open the last of my defenses. I slowly turned to face her. My eyes were burning with tears I refused to let fall. She was standing there, her beautiful face etched with concern, and I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't hide. "I'm so tired of being alone," I whispered, the confession torn from the deepest part of me. "But I'm terrified of not being." She closed the small distance between us in 2 silent steps. She didn't speak. She just lifted her hand and gently cupped my jaw, her thumb stroking my cheek. The gesture was unbelievably tender. It was everything I had been starving for and everything I was terrified of. I leaned into her touch, my eyes fluttering shut. "You don't have to be terrified of me," she murmured, her voice a low vibration that I felt all the way down to my bones. My eyes opened. Hers were dark, searching, full of a question she was finally asking. And I finally had the answer. I closed the last inch of space between us and pressed my lips to hers. The first kiss was not soft. It was desperate. It was the release of weeks of unspoken tension, of longing and fear and hope all crashing together. It was a dam breaking. Her lips were soft and warm, and they yielded to the pressure of mine instantly. Her other hand came up to my waist, pulling me flush against her, and I tangled my fingers in the soft fabric of her shirt, holding on like I was drowning and she was the shore. It was messy and urgent, a collision of need. I could taste the coffee she'd had an hour ago, could feel the slight tremble in her hands as they held me. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless, resting our foreheads against each other. "Okay," she breathed out, a small shaky laugh in her voice. "So, it is a problem." "A huge problem," I whispered back, before kissing her again. This time it was different, slower, deeper. It was a kiss of exploration, of confirmation. It was a conversation without words. Her hands moved from my waist to my back, then up into my hair, tilting my head to deepen the kiss. I felt a sob of pure, unadulterated relief bubble up in my chest. I wasn't too much. For her, right here, in this moment, I was exactly enough. She wasn't running, she was holding me closer. The fortress had fallen, and in the ruins, something new and beautiful was beginning to grow. Waking up the next morning was a disorienting experience. For a moment, I was adrift in that familiar space between sleep and consciousness, aware only of the warmth at my back and the unaccustomed weight of an arm draped over my waist. Then it all came flooding back. The phone call, the confession, the series of kisses that had led us from the kitchen to my bedroom. Maya, she was here, in my bed. I lay perfectly still, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across the duvet. Her breathing was a slow, steady puff of air against the back of my neck. Her scent, that mix of her coconut shampoo and my sandalwood soap, was all around me, woven into the fabric of my sheets. It felt both jarringly new and deeply, inexplicably right. I carefully, slowly, turned over to face her. She was still asleep, her face relaxed and peaceful in a way I hadn't seen it before. One of her hands was curled on the pillow near her cheek. Her lips were slightly parted. I watched the gentle rise and fall of her chest, overcome by a wave of tenderness so fierce it almost hurt. This was what I had run from, this vulnerability, this terrifying, beautiful intimacy. As if she could feel my gaze, her eyelids fluttered open. Her dark eyes, hazy with sleep, found mine. A slow, lazy smile spread across her face. "Hi," she murmured, her voice thick and gravelly with sleep. "Hi," I whispered back, my own smile feeling shy and new. We lay there for a long time, just looking at each other in the quiet morning light. The silence wasn't charged with unspoken tension anymore. It was filled with a soft, peaceful wonder. "So," she said eventually, her thumb beginning to draw lazy circles on my hip, "we should probably talk about this." A knot of my old anxiety tightened in my stomach. We don't have to. Alara. She shifted, propping herself up on one elbow so she could look down at me properly. Yes, we do. I'm not Sarah. I don't do ambiguity. I need to know what this is. What you want. Her directness was a splash of cold, refreshing water. There were no games, no hidden meanings, just a clear, honest question. I owed her a clear, honest answer. I want this, I said, meeting her gaze. The words felt huge, momentous. I want you, but I'm not good at it. The relationship stuff, I'm rusty and scared. I can work with rusty and scared, she said, her smile softening. I can't work with closed doors. As long as the door stays open, we can figure the rest out. She leaned down and gave me a soft, lingering kiss. Together. The word hung in the air between us. Together. It was a promise. Later, showered and dressed, we sat at the kitchen island with our coffee, the scene of our climactic moment from the night before. The real world began to intrude. The landlord's assistant called while you were in the shower, Maya said, her tone wry. They found another complication. It's going to be at least another week, maybe more. A month ago, that news would have sent me into a spiral of social anxiety. Now, my only response was a surge of relief. This is getting insane, Maya continued, shaking her head. I'm essentially homeless. No, you're not, I said firmly. I reached across the island and took her hand, lacing our fingers together. Her skin was warm and strong against mine. You live here now? She looked at our joined hands, then back up at my face, a question in her eyes. I mean it, I said, my voice steady. Stay for as long as this takes, or for as long as you want. We can fight this landlord idiot together. I'm a good editor. I can write a demand letter so scathing it'll make his hair curl. We can look up tenancy laws, file a formal complaint. It's not your problem anymore. It's our problem. The word our felt as significant as the first kiss. It was the concrete action, the tangible proof that things had changed. We weren't just two neighbors in a strange situation anymore. We were a team. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Maya's face, the kind of smile that reached all the way to her eyes. Okay, she said softly. Okay, our problem. A few days later, the house felt completely different. It was no longer a sterile fortress of solitude. It was a home. One of Maya's vibrant, colorful silk hangings was draped over the living room window, catching the afternoon light and casting a warm, jeweled pattern across the floor. A collection of her potted plants had appeared on the windowsill, their green leaves breathing life into the space. Her sketchbook lay open on the coffee table next to my boring tax law manuscript. The air smelled of her spices, my coffee, and the faint, sweet scent of the vanilla candles we now lit every evening. She was still here. Her water was still off, a fact that had become almost irrelevant. The muddy trench in the yard was no longer a symbol of disruption, but the catalyst that had brought us together. We had written the letter to the landlord, a joint effort of her righteous anger and my precise cutting prose. It was a small step, but it was a step we had taken as a unit. That evening, I was curled on the sofa, reading, while Maya sat on the floor, sketching. The quiet between us was a comfortable, living thing. I looked up from my book and just watched her. The way her brows furrowed in concentration, the way she bit her lip, the way her long fingers moved the charcoal across the page. A feeling of profound peace settled over me, a feeling I hadn't realized I was capable of having. I had spent so long building walls to keep the world out, to keep myself safe from being hurt again. But safety wasn't solitude. Safety was this. It was the quiet, unwavering presence of a woman who saw my fear and didn't run. A woman who taught me that the bravest thing you can do is not to lock the door, but to open it, just a crack, and see who is standing on the other side. My life here hadn't begun when I signed the lease. It had begun the moment I opened my door to a beautiful stranger with an empty bucket and a problem. And in solving hers, she had inadvertently solved my own. I had let her in to use my shower, and in doing so, I had let love in too.